Greetings, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Charles Johnson, and I will be your moderator for this session. I served as the Global Director of Innovation at Puma, where I was charged with bringing new performance technologies to products, to sports products, mostly footwear and apparel. And today I consult to the sports and health and lifestyle industries in the space of innovation, design, and strategy. My place in the world of wearables came from the natural evolution of analog sports, bringing digital technology to traditionally analog products, products that you wear for sport, thus wearables. But that's just one angle. So there are lots of different angles, and that's why we have our panel here today. We have wearable tech experts from different spaces to share their thoughts and wisdom. You will learn about them through the course of our talk, but I would ask that before we get started that everybody introduce themselves. So panelists, can you please take about a half a minute to do so and share a bit about yourself? And I am going to go from left to right and start with Billy. How's that?
Sounds good. Thank you so much for having us all here today. Really happy to be part of this conversation. So my name is Billy Whitehouse. I'm the CEO and Creative Director of Wearable X, and we specialize in integrating sensors and haptic feedback into soft and hard goods. So namely textiles like leggings that can actually measure your yoga pose and provide real-time vibration to guide you where to focus.
That sounds cool. Jacob, where are you coming from?
Hi, Charles. Thanks for the opportunity today. So I'm really delighted to be here. My sensor background is kind of what got me into wearables in the first place. So I've been working with sensors, with wearable tech for about 10 years. And my work now is around bringing all of the technical requirements together and turning people's ideas into wearable tech. So Thrive Wearables is an embodiment of my experience coupled with a whole load of amazing people who've joined the team over the last few years. And we work across many industries, from health and fitness and sports, and all sorts of new and emerging niche ideas come out of this space at the moment. It's very, very exciting, and really delighted to be here.
Cool. And Mindy, you're up.
Thank you, Charles. It's so wonderful to be here, especially with the other panelists. My name is Mindy Shire. I'm the CEO of Gamut Management and the Runway of Dreams Foundation. Runway of Dreams works with the fashion industry to help raise awareness to the need for mainstream adaptive clothing. As we mentioned, wearable technology can be as simple as utilizing a magnet instead of a button to be able to make it more wearable for people with disabilities. And Gamut Management is the first talent management company exclusively for people with disabilities to help work and be consultants for companies to develop and create adaptive products, as people with disabilities are natural innovators to navigate a world that wasn't created for them.
Right on, right on. Great to hear. Jenny, let's hear from you.
I'm Jenny Sida. I am the Chief Design Thinker of Green Neurons Design Technologies. Actually, I've been in the industry of manufacturing, of garment manufacturing in the US for over 16 plus years, but my background is computer science, and I was a software developer for a long time. I have experience in the pharmaceutical industry and banking, real-time industry. And so I am excited about this time because I always dream about being a fashion designer, and that's why I decided to go into this apparel development sector. Right away, I saw potential almost 20 years ago, how we can make this industry a lot more technological. And now we are really seeing the fruit. We are seeing that a lot of things are coming out of merging technology and apparel together.
Okay, well, that's actually something we're going to talk about. So thank you, everybody, for your brief background stories. We have about 10 topics that we're going to talk about, and I'm going to tee them up by asking a question, and allow me, if you will, to direct it to one of you. Then I'd love to hear from the rest of the panel as well. We'll also be getting some questions from the audience, so I'll try and bring those in as best that I can as they come in. And with all of that, there's a lot to cover. I'll be trying to keep my eye on time. So if I'm pushy and moving the conversation, forgive me. I just want to make sure that we get everything we can out of the time that we have. So beginning our first question. So as I mentioned, I come from an industry that for decades long was really only the wear part of wearables, right? That is analog apparel designed for sports. In that space, garment technology alone has evolved quite a bit. Now enter circuit boards, sensors, algorithms, and it's quite a mashup to make work and to make work well. So the question is, can technology and clothing really exist seamlessly? And how should these two industries adapt together? And I'd like to ask Jacob that question to start. You, and through your work at Thrive Wearables, perhaps, I could be wrong, might have the broadest exposure to all of the wearable technologies, or maybe at least all of the applications. I may be wrong, but in any case, what do you think? Can tech and clothing exist seamlessly?
It's a really important question to find the answer to. The traditional supply chains for both industries are very, very different, as most people will recognize. And that stretches into things like tolerances and the sort of design approach for electronics being at the sort of nano level, at the bottom with the silicon design, and then the machinery and the techniques and the materials used for apparel being very much bigger than that. So those two industries combining from those extremes is a really interesting and challenging problem. And that's all the way through that whole process. So the people working those machines, understanding the materials, having to bring that together and talk in terms of hard electronics with very high precision versus much more malleable, flexible, fibrous, different types of material at the apparel end. That's the biggest challenge in bringing those manufacturing supply chains skills together. And I think it's always going to be the case that they will remain distinct, essentially, because the combination of those things is a niche, and it always will be a niche. There will be huge volumes happening either side of that. And so we will see, and we are seeing factories that really take on that challenge and become good at that process.
Mm-hmm.
But it's going to continue to be really challenging because, electronics and sensors and batteries and circuit boards are just horrible, hard things that people really don't want on their bodies. So to kind of bridge those problems and solve those challenges will be a persistent issue, and it will take a particular company or factory to say, like, we are just going to focus on that. And the volumes are there, they're starting to emerge. So we will see that, but it will be a small single-digit percentage of the biggest supply chain that we have, which is around these two industries.
Right. Mindy, you opened my eyes just very quickly with the idea of, okay, magnets are part of wearable technology. So that now maybe broadens the spectrum of what we might consider to be wearable technology. What are your thoughts? And, can these industries adapt together? What are your thoughts there?
Thank you, Charles. And I apologize. I was remiss. I didn't do my accessibility check-in that I am a white woman with curly red hair, and I'm wearing a hot pink sweater so that everybody can really appreciate being on this panel, no matter what their ability. But it's such an important point in terms of what does wearable technology mean? Well, for the population of people with disabilities, it could mean ease of dressing. And again, that's utilizing different methods or modifications to what already exists. I mean, the reality is that the button and the buttonhole was developed in the 13th century. And the fact that we are still using that technology in today's day and age can be so much improved, so that we're actually adding consumers to being able to wear the same product. And that is something that I'm constantly working with the technology world in challenging them. Let's think about what the next closure is. Let's get the next iteration of a magnet or Velcro or other ways to close garments, as that technology can truly change the lives of those that live it in the world of disability.
Does anybody else have anything to share on that? I'm going to open it up to anybody.
Yeah, I'm curious. I mean, I think the area of smart fastenings is beginning to become really, really interesting. And I think that we've seen everything from the way people actually do clip in electronics to actually allowing that to potentially become Velcro. And I think there's a really unique opportunity to keep exploring smart fastenings. And I think this is just the beginning of a really transformative business.
Jenny, are you seeing anything that says, that these spaces should adapt together?
Oh, absolutely. Since I work with entrepreneurs the last 16 years on innovative ideas, I have a few projects that people come in and the inventor wanted to make more adaptive clothing, especially for people on wheelchair. I mean, think about that. That's one area that we have not paid enough of attention to, how to improve the life of people. I think that is the main goal here with Jacob, what he's doing in the health care sector, some of his projects. I am seeing that a lot. A couple of my projects involved with safety, garments, and also my favorite one was the blazer that I got a chance to consult for and work on the prototypes for Flextronics for Michael Phelps at the Rio Olympics in 2016. There's so much we can do, and especially I am inspired by Mindy's vision. It's like we just need to focus more of how we can improve other people's lives.
That's perhaps a good segue to our next question, which is that all of you guys do what you do. Creating wearable technology is difficult, and experience it's difficult. And there are challenges around every corner. So if we step back, perhaps, is there some commonality in those challenges? So the question is, what are the core challenges of wearable tech and how can we overcome them? And I would ask Billy that question. Have you identified some core challenges for you in this space?
Oh, most definitely. I think anyone who tells you that this is an easy industry to get into is lying. This is, rife with challenges. I think the beginning for us was always going to be around washability. And when you are integrating electronics into textiles, which we similarly to the rest of the panel have been doing for 10 years now across many different verticals, but always with a focus on haptics, which is vibrational feedback. Integrating washable haptic motors, honestly, it was a challenge that took years, and we made lots of mistakes. And I'm thrilled to say that we did, because I have learned over the last 10 years what not to do, and that in itself is a skill. But washability, number one, how do you put this through the tumble dryer as well that has to withstand a huge amount of heat? And then secondarily to washability in general, I mean, how do you power these things to have the right battery life? And then what is the future of the battery life, and how do we change people's perception of chargeability? I've always been really excited about an induction charge coat hanger for smart, we'll call them blazers. We actually had a navigation jacket back in the time, using haptics to direct, let's say, a bicyclist to turn left or right. Obviously, it's something we're very passionate about how haptics integrate. But I think washability, chargeability, and then honestly, there's a way of and a necessary goal to work with customers on a changed expectation of what these products do. And I think a lot of the challenges that people want, we want the sci-fi future already, and our customers genuinely want that. But in fact, technology evolves incrementally, and it is step by step. And we have had amazing transformation in the last 10 years, and it has become cheaper and faster and easier to integrate. That being said, our customers 10 years ago wanted flying cars. So I think that's an interesting challenge that we all have to face.
Sure. And that makes me think, Jenny, I mean, with your work with green neurons, now you're layering on sustainability and social impact. Are those bringing new challenges to you?
It has always been, being an engineer first and then the fashion design next. I find, the foundation of just understanding how software works and hardware works first, it's very important before someone should think about applying the technology. I agree with Billy completely. That's the two things that we are still trying to solve. A, it's the battery life and the renewable energy part of it. Like my current project, we are exploring how to best implement solar power. We need to keep the gadget working, otherwise the consumers are not going to use it if it only lasts for like 5 or 10 minutes. And with Green Neurons, I changed the structure of my company recently is because I want to focus more on, merging technology and fashion. Like I have a lot of assistants in the past and they all graduated from fashion schools, but the process of creating a product, even though it's the same, but our schools are not teaching that methodology like they are teaching engineers. And so that's another challenge on why I want to have more social impact, meaning is part of it is to really create a new way of teaching our young people how to do what they love, which is, being a creator, but also giving them the kind of training that can really help them to be successful. You are thinking both left brain and right brain at the same time.
That brings us up actually to another question, which is, where do we deploy wearable technology? So, thinking up cool things is one of my pastimes. I created a sneaker that laces itself with a motor and a battery. But, that's one experience. And that's not for everybody, right? It's not going to be something that brings a benefit to everybody. So what are the realistic opportunities of wearable tech for healthcare? Jacob, I know you do a lot in that space, and the mass market. And I would actually direct that question first to you, Jacob. Some of your work caters specifically to healthcare. And so what are the realistic opportunities there?
Yeah, I think it's a big area, so it's a nice one to focus on in terms of opportunity. The main opportunity, as we see it, really is in changing healthcare systems and changing approaches to health. So COVID has exposed a lot of challenges with remote monitoring and with non-contact healthcare, as it were. Now that's for me as an entrepreneur and business owner, a huge opportunity, and I'm very excited about the commercial side of that. But in terms of the health economic side of that, it's absolutely huge what can change, because in the UK, our health system is based on very outdated modes of care. Although the people working there obviously do a great job, it's just about fixing people when they're broken. And so the analytics that you can use before that and the sensing that you can use before that happens is where I'm really excited. Measuring people on a longer time scale and understanding those trends and where they're going. And I always use the example of fall detection. Can you spot someone falling before they've actually fallen over? Well, yes, you can.
Wow.
Because you understand the degradation of a joint or of part of their skeletal system, and you can say, like, actually you need to be using a stick because you're getting to that point where you just need a bit of support. Whether people will take that advice and do anything with it is another question, because behavior change is a tricky one, especially in the elderly. So preventative healthcare is going to be disrupted completely because it's broken at the moment, healthcare, and I think then there's the other side of the equation. If people have been into a hospital or care environment, had an operation, been cared for in a hospital, getting them out of that environment as quickly as possible has many benefits. And so you can imagine a world where the types of consumer electronics or the consumer medical devices that you may be able to use in your home or in another setting have some correlation and mirror the quality of those things which are being used in a hospital. So you can have a much more organic transition between those environments. And it's those two sort of areas, stopping people going there in the first place and then gently pulling them back into a different care setting as soon as possible to free up hospital beds, to reduce infection risk, and all those other kind of things. Super exciting.
Care, clear, a lot of opportunities there. What about the mass market? Billy, you've had exposure to mass market. What do you see there as in terms of real opportunities?
I mean, I definitely agree with Jacob. I think you paved a beautiful picture there of how the healthcare system is and isn't working, and how there's a huge opportunity for mass market recovery. Honestly, the way we talk about recovery isn't just about post-hospitalization, but it's also just, your own recovery of your own body after a small injury. And where we have, I would say, and where the huge opportunity is for our thinking right now, at least, is around mobility. And I think this relates a lot back to Mindy's work. Actually, we're seeing that there's a direct correlation between mobility decline and cognitive decline. And if we can be, I would say, aggressive in that space and designing for that space, then we can make a really big difference, and that can truly be mass market.
Okay.
Charles,
Yeah.
may I say in one point on, especially, thank you, especially on what you just brought up about the self-tying sneakers, which at the time, I'm not sure if the company realized that there's over 1 billion people on our planet with a disability. It's the largest minority in the world, and a huge part of that population would have benefited so much from self-tying sneakers. I am a fashion designer by trade, but I'm also the mother of a child with muscular dystrophy who's almost 17 years old and cannot tie his shoes, and most likely will never be able to tie his shoes because he doesn't have that capability. So when you think of it from a mainstream perspective, you would be bringing in millions and millions of customers to be able to utilize that technology that, again, and as Billy just mentioned, would change the course of their life. My son's going to college next year. Is he going to ask his roommate to help him tie his shoes? These are things that need to be really digested from the perspective of technology and how it can greatly benefit somebody's life.
Well, to that point, I mean, when we were in our beta testing for that product, we did actually have folks with disabilities, partial hands, conditions where it was difficult to lace their shoes themselves. And so I wanted to get that perspective to make sure that our experience was working well. So thank you for that point, for sure.
I think I'd love to, if you don't mind, I'd love to add one more point in here. I think that, without fail, disability does drive innovation, and that needs to continue to be part of the story. What I think is really interesting is it also needs to go back to what you're just talking about, Charles, which is it needs to be part of the data collection protocols. And often that's where some of those gaps happen. And I think that it's such an important step for anyone who's thinking about going into this space, and disability and inclusion is a huge part of our focus. And certainly there's a really interesting area and opportunity for haptics in that space. But this is, I would say there's a gap, I would say, from what's begun as disability drives innovation to how do we build that into the protocols to make sure that data collection happens accurately.
That's an excellent point, which we're going to get to later, data collection or using data. But Jenny, I had a question, or sort of dovetailing onto this idea of receptive, whether wearable technology is receptive to the mass market. Is there a divergence of consumers who desire sustainability? That's some of the area that you're in, and wearable products. Does that create a new opportunity with that convergence? Do you see?
I love this question, because I definitely, when you're just asking, I was like, yes, of course. I mean, think about that. I haven't done that research yet myself. I mean, if seaweed can be well adapted for wearable technology, like you just know that it's going to biodegrade at the end, and after the sensor has been used for numerous years. And then another thing about the constant need to improve, coming from software, I understand that I advise my clients all the time, it's not just an app, right? The app needs maintenance, right? So whatever we are doing, we have to think about how we're going to create a circular economy. We have to create a sustainable cycle, because, otherwise we're going to see a lot of dead wearables in the dumpsters. And that's something we need to address it now before we go even further.
So it's not a matter necessarily of desire, it's a matter of requirement. I mean, that we make our product sustainable. Okay, that's later on. Okay.
And a price point that's accessible, let's be honest. That's the one part about that scalability that I think is necessary.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we all, I guess we're on this, we could say we're part of this trend, that wearable technology is a trend, but there's another phenomenon that's occurring, and that is we've seen tech giants enter and leave the wearable tech space. So what do you see as being integral to survival and success in this space? I would ask any of you really at this point. Yeah.
User-driven has to be user-centric, user-driven, because ultimately, who are going to live with that technology? Us, right? So we cannot let a CEO just to decide it by himself or herself. We have to work together as a community.
Mm-hmm.
I agree wholeheartedly with that. The user-centric, human-focused approach, and turning that into a business case and showing that this is a huge opportunity for revenue building by increasing the amount of people and consumers that can utilize the same product by implementing technology, which is what everybody on this panel is working towards.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the bottom line for many companies, is understanding the business opportunity. So it's not only the right thing to do, it's a huge opportunity.
Jacob,
you also think, pardon me.
No, sorry, I was just going to say, Jacob, you looked like you got a little bit fired up for that question. Did you have something to share?
After you, Billy. No, please.
If anything, I'll direct this at you, Jacob. Like, don't you think that that like timing is honestly everything? And there was a bunch of big players, let's say Intel, who were in the space 10 years ago, and it was too early. And people, I guess, interested, yes. And the data was valuable, yes. Did it do enough for the user? Potentially no. And potentially the answer is data isn't enough. But what do you think, Jacob? Do you think that timing is really everything in this particular business?
Well, yeah, you mentioned 10 years ago. I mean, what happened then? We got Google Glass, right? So if that's all that Google can do for the space, I guess it's good that they've jumped out. Now, that's a bit unfair. You know, I think it's difficult for these big companies to find the margins and the revenue that they need to keep their growth going, right? They've got incredible requirements when it comes to growing. Just growing by a fractional percent requires massive revenue. And with an industry, especially the health part of wearables and health tech, specifically the consumer side, for them to make money in that space, they need ubiquity. They need Apple Watch. So they need things that just, you know, people are going to accept very easily, buy in huge volume. And to some degree, the kind of health benefits come after almost. And then when you start looking at those health benefits and trying to turn those into genuine, valuable products, you end up with all this diversity happening and all this kind of segmentation and all these different requirements and all these different measurement points on the body to get the data that you need. And it becomes very unwieldy. And I think really that's what we've seen with the big tech companies, is they just can't cope with the complexity of trying to bring all of that to a head into a singular unit. Apple have done it fantastically, as they always do. What are they called? AirPods are going to be the next thing when it comes to sensor technology, and Apple will continue to make huge strides in that space, and they'll be back in health tech very soon, I'm sure. You know, it's going to be tough for them to find that ubiquity because people really struggle with new form factors and any kind of friction that you put in their way in the consumer space. So I think that's really why they've dipped out. I put my, I fist pumped when I heard about that news. That's fantastic, because what it means for the smaller companies is the market is ripe for innovators and for people to carve out those niches and really stress test them and find the communities that will be supported by those products. So I think there's huge opportunity still. And I think this just proves that it's an entrepreneur's world really, rather than a big tech company's world at this stage.
So what I'm hearing is, so a question just came up, which is from the audience, which is it too early for the mass market? And I heard from Billy, who said, okay, price is a key factor. And Jacob, you're saying actually no, because of, some of the big companies now are making the form factors and the technology, let's say, well integrated into people's lives. So are we seeing, are things too early for the mass market, or are we getting to that point where it will be? I mean, we still don't have as many people that have smartphones as have wearable technology. If you want to call, you could call a smartphone a wearable technology, right? Or earbuds. But yeah, how close are we to really getting to mass market, I guess is the question.
Apple turned over at 12 billion in hearables last year, right? We're there already.
Okay. Okay. All right. Hey, so I think everybody in the room is definitely ahead of the curve when it comes to wearables. I mean, you guys are doing more than. It's not okay to just be sort of in the game. But still, wearable technology is not as ubiquitous or as pervasive as, say, a smartphone. So is it required to be in the space that the boundaries, that you have to push the boundaries to be relevant, to be in front, to solve new problems? Or we, society, are we better served tackling simpler problems using technology that you can wear? So how can we push the boundaries with innovation in wearables while still remaining relevant and realistic? I think some things were answered earlier. Mindy, you spoke about, things that very simple benefits that we can bring to people. Are there more of those things that we can bring to society that aren't only about, serving disabilities or something? Do you know what I mean? Are there simpler problems? Mindy, what are you thinking there?
It's interesting that yes, in the world of technology, the utilization of magnets or, low pile hook and loop, which is Velcro, is a technology that is so profoundly changing people's lives, that in the world that I reside in, that is at our fingertips of what we could be doing, and we are doing, everybody on this panel is doing right now. That really it's about a lot of education, also of the importance of rethinking the way that things have been done, especially in an industry like fashion, that this is the way that it's done. That's the way that a button is used on a button front shirt. And it's having that moment to rethink, well, if we change out or add to or modify a closure system, that just opened up the world to millions more people. So yes, that is simple in the way of rethinking the way things have been done, that will profoundly change the landscape and allow for all of the work that Jenny and Billy and Jacob are doing to bring it to the next level.
Yeah. In reading and getting some background in your work, Mindy, which is delivering to a core need, what I took out of your Jeans project was the core, bringing somebody confidence, right? We're not talking about a technology yet. We're talking about an emotion. So it would be interesting if we approach things more as, okay, what's the emotion we're addressing? And oh, by the way, what wearable technology could we apply to it? I think that could be a different way of thinking about things, or
human-centric. It's about the humans and the effect that it has on how somebody is able to dress. Can they even dress themselves? Can they tie their shoes? These are things that, myself included, until Oliver came into my life, just took for granted. It's just what you do. You learn how to dress yourself. And for a tremendous part of our world, that's not an option.
Yeah.
Yeah,
go for it.
So, things don't have to be this, elaborate, like really expensive, innovation. And I like the fact that just listening to my panelists, colleagues, like Alexa, this smart speaker, if you just make it just a tiny bit of little smaller, and then you actually put a keychain on it, and it's part of your outfit, right? So I mean, it's not like you have to completely rip out everything. There are existing technologies you can use, and then just give it a little bit of a boost, and then it can be adapted and it's relevant.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to switch topics for a moment, but it did come up earlier, the idea of data, and in particular, algorithms in technology and our dependency on algorithms. So weapons of math destruction, as Kathy O'Neill puts it, is when algorithms get things wrong because of inborn bias. And she formed ORCA, which is O'Neill Risk Consulting and Algorithmic Auditing, which keeps an eye on algorithmic risk. So many of the algorithms that govern so much in our lives go unchecked, and that equals algorithms that falsely identify or predict things. So the question for the panel is, how mindful should we be of potential bias in wearable tech? And do we think about diversity in wearable tech? And Jacob, I'd like you to start with that question. Do your clients think about this aspect of deploying technology?
Well, I'm not going to bounce the responsibility onto them at the moment. Let's start with the core stuff here. So, it's pretty disgraceful, the history of data collection in clinical trials, the sexism, the racism that's baked into all of that. We've got a pretty poor situation for a long way back in time, and that is also problematic across the hardware space as well. So, PPG sensing, photoplethysmography sensing for heart rate and those kind of things. Those sensors do not work the same for people with different colored skin. And so there's a bias right at the beginning of the data collection. So we can talk about algorithms, we could talk about how we improve those things, how we could do better clinical trials, but there's a lot more to worry about, unfortunately. And I think these challenges, they do get talked about. I don't see systemic change in terms of how these things are kind of audited and checked and tested from the beginning of their conception through the trials that they may go through at core technology level. And I think that, for me, is where one needs to start. The algorithmic side of things, that of course then sits on top of all of that infrastructure, and again has to go through that auditing process. But my feeling is it's a bit it's a real challenge, and I sort of sigh whenever I realize how little has been done to address many of these challenges. And I think what we can do as innovators really needs to start by baking that into the narrative and the discussion that we have with clients, into the design of trials that we're involved with, and the insistence that things are done in a different way and that we cover these bases. It will cost more money, unfortunately, because we're breaking the mold and we're doing things in a different way. But that really, not doing that is in itself, continuing to be sexist and racist and not being inclusive. So we have to actually hit that head on, is my opinion.
Right.
May I add in there that I actually am seeing systematic change. I delightfully have a positive twist to yes, we've had a really horrible past where that has not been the case, but I can genuinely say on the projects that I'm working on, I have seen more diversity and inclusion and more genuine protocols that are doing the right kind of data collection to make sure that these biases can change, essentially. And there's a beautiful poet. Her name's Joy Bulawami. She has a Netflix series called Coded Bias. I highly recommend watching this. It's her company's also called Poets of Code. It truly speaks to the fundamental problem that we know exists. But I do genuinely believe that the change is happening, and that it is our responsibility to move this forward and to move the needle.
Jenny, your work looks to be ethical. Is that something that you think about, diversity and making sure that we get our tech right?
Yes, this is very important to me. I imported from overseas countries at the beginning of my fashion journey, and I really needed to see some major change right now, that our human conditions, the working environment, the living condition, the quality of life, I really want to see that happening more, better, because we talk about mass market, but with the 3D technology I've been using for developing my garments for my clients, they can order small quantities. That why I'm bringing this up is because you don't have to make a million things of the same thing, the style in 1 million units and to get the cost down and then you send it to the dumpster. I think we need to really genuinely look at how we can still bring the unit cost down, but put high emphasis on the cost is also if I can improve someone's lives. The value that you're providing with your products and your service needs to be emphasized as part of, the true value of that wearable. And I think we can achieve that. And I think that it takes everyone to work together. Again, it's not just one person stuff. And in terms of bias, I study artificial intelligence in college when I was in computer science. I have to agree that it's highly biased because if you are taking only a subset of data from a subset of representation and you're training that again and again and again, they're not being open-minded. I mean, that set of data is only represent a very small amount of what is going on in terms of our data collection and our actual, interaction and things going on in our societies.
A question that just came through, which is how can we decrease the cost in these scenarios? And Jenny, you mentioned thinking about cost in a different way. That's one way. Are there other ways that we can decrease the cost for our technology? Anybody?
I'm still thinking about my seaweed, even though, like I said, I haven't started researching. But I think there is one company using seaweed as a power. We just need to think about more organic way of utilizing our organic waste. Say we all eat oranges, so we have a lot of orange peel. Can we turn that into a source of power? And that is biodegradable. At the same time, it's not like a $500 million you get that running. It's orange peel. They are around. When they make orange juice. So we just need to look around and find solutions.
Indeed, I agree. Mindy, you were going to say something, I think.
Yes, and I mean, in the work that I do, it would really be having more brands and more companies utilizing the same technology, like magnets. Right now, they're expensive. They're certainly more expensive than a button. So the more brands that say, yeah, that's a great idea, let's utilize them, the cost of the magnets will go down, which would make the product ultimately be more affordable, and lower end brands could be using magnets that are not able to right now because they're just too expensive. So I think it's important to kind of have more and more brands utilize the technology to bring the cost down.
Would that sounds like a little bit could lead us in the direction of sort of open source, right? Is there more that people can benefit throughout the industry from a shared technology rather than exclusive technologies? Easy to say for sure. But maybe that's a part solution. And also, Jenny, what you said, the idea of mining, waste, right? As you said, waste is everywhere. And so, if that can be, and it's also regional, right? Typically. So that starts to go to localization, a local economy. So yeah, maybe there's this idea of sort of open source shared resources or shared technology brought across industries and for all to use. Wouldn't that be nice?
That would be nice. I don't want to be the contrarian on the panel, although I do think it often makes it more interesting. So don't mind me.
Not at all.
Innovation is expensive. That is one thing that everyone has to be aware of, that building something new and building it from scratch, there is going to be a threshold of this is going to cost time and money. That being said, over time, obviously, things can get cheaper and faster and easier to achieve. I think, the entrepreneur or the business should get creative about how they bake in those costs. So, maybe it's a subscription service that pays for that product and you're not charging the customer up front the true value of the product, but you're charging over time. And I think that there's innovative and interesting ways to continue to do that so that you can understand or bake in your cost of innovation throughout the product lifecycle.
Got it. Okay. So this is leading to our final question, the $1 million question, which is, what do you think the future of wearable tech looks like? And maybe it won't have a look at all because everyone will have chips implanted. I don't know, implanted. But what do you see, Jenny, as the future of wearable tech? What does it look like?
My fantasy is to dress the robots. I really want to create outfits for robots. Well, I think we definitely will see more integration, like the blanket. Like I can say, I don't know the company that is doing it already, and there are a lot of great things that we can see that in everyday life we can implement it, like a blanket for autistic children that gives them the comfort of what they need. Things like that, and that's the future. I see that it's going to be in everyday life. It's going to be every way and every part of our lifestyles.
Okay. And Jacob, what do you see as the future of wearable tech?
Well, that's a good question, and I'll start in the near future. So the near future is going to see a resurgence of glass type technology. I think Apple will come out with smart glasses quite soon, and I think that, although it sounds a bit dry and boring, I think that will be quite revolutionary. I think it's going to start the trend towards much less reliance on the smartphone, and I think that's something that's quite interesting for many reasons, in terms of the ideas of augmented reality and being able to be kind of part in a digital experience and part out. And I think that, for me, is very exciting. I can't stand it, quite frankly, at the moment. Is not something that's of interest to me at all when I look at the technology. But I think if it becomes at that consumer level, where people are using it very subtly, partially, occasionally, but it's also wrapped in something that's pleasant and nice to be engaged with, the Facebook glasses is complete antithesis of that because of who's running them for me. But I think that's a near-term thing. What's frustrating with wearable tech is the lack of harmony with pieces of technology that one engages with. So even Apple earbuds, which I use extensively all the time, constantly annoy me because they just connect to the wrong thing, or they're half connect, or there's all those sort of niggles with wearable tech. And I think in the near future, those things are starting to sort of disappear. And when we have those sort of body human-based systems that we're using on a day-to-day basis, so earbuds, glasses, potentially things like shoes, which really haven't shown an awful lot of progress, despite the fact that they're a fantastic form factor for many reasons, in terms of potentially charging, housing lots of battery, having certain sensors, etc. So there's those kind of things that I think will change. But what wearable tech needs to do is not even be a term, and I think that's the problem. Is it's still this thing, right? So that will be the sort of midterm projection, really, is that we start to just expect it and know that it's there and not have to talk about it being there. And this sort of marries in nicely with some of the themes of the previous panel, where sports tech drives kind of a lot of this innovation when it comes to sensing. And I think that kind of gives a good idea of where the problem is as well. The idea of having to put on a sports thing to do sports because you've got to measure a certain parameter. Well, many of the sports tech systems just rely on accelerometers and quite simple tech. So I think that kind of low-hanging fruit approach to monitoring of people's context and movement and some of the core parameters, as that starts to become smaller and it becomes possible to integrate it in multiple form factors, we end up with a more sort of general human theme in terms of the data as the day evolves, and we kind of have that data set as a backdrop for many applications. But I'll leave it at that.
Jacob, did I hear you say that footwear is a unique form factor that could be exploited more than it is? Did I hear you say that? Or
I feel that footwear has been underdeveloped. I can't quite work out why everyone is not using smart shoes for some reason. You can measure pressure, and you can measure core body temperature, and you can measure movement dynamics. You can detect diabetes type issues. There's all sorts of things that are exciting about shoes. So I'm it's a bit of a sort of a
interesting
thing for me, really. I'm into shoes. I like shoes.
Okay, well,
Me too.
me too.
Me too.
Jenny,
All of us.
Mindy, what do you think about what does the future of wearable tech look like?
I'm so encouraged, honestly, and at least in the fashion industry, I think that the future is here. We are carving out a new category in the industry of adaptive, which the definition of adaptive is incorporating wearable technology. And I completely agree with Jacob that it shouldn't have to be called out. It's just, part of a new design ethos, or creating ways to make the product more wearable, whether that's in the fabric, whether that's in the closure, whether that's in detecting certain things. So the fact that we launched with Tommy Hilfiger in 2016 and made fashion history by developing the first ever mainstream adaptive clothing line. It's now 2021, and I can name 6 other mainstream brands that are now in the space. In the fashion industry, that's a very short amount of time to have so many big brands, Nike, Zappos, JCPenney, Target, Kohl's, understanding the power and the value of getting involved in the adaptive space. I am incredibly encouraged and excited for the future.
Cool. Billy, I think you're going to have the last word on this. What is the future?
I'll give it a fancy term then. I would say invisibly integrated ambient computing. That is just omnipresent, that is able to do vital sensing, that is able to improve for the individual, no matter the individual's needs, and is able to live there seamlessly in our lives, so that it can be A, human, so that it's useful for us, but B, sit there and make the data really valuable. And I think it's almost the bigger question is, where does all this data live? How do we make sense of all of this data, and how do we make it really valuable for the customer, or for the wearer, as I often call them, because I do hate this word, the user. So I think that it's, in this world that we live in for wearable technology, it's the wearer.
Right. That's a good point. The wearer. That's right. Well, we've gotten through our questions, and so that kind of wraps it up.